Are you ready for a little story? Why don't you get all comfy and cozy because tonight we're going to travel way, way back in time to meet a very special boy. We're going to find out how the small choices he made helped him grow up to be one of the greatest leaders ever. But before we get started, I've got a really big question for you. What do you think it is that makes a person truly great? Is it being super, super strong? Or maybe it's being the smartest person in the room? Could it just be being famous? Let's keep that question in our minds as we listen to our story. You know, sometimes greatness starts in the quietest places, when no one is even looking. And our story? Well, it begins with a curious boy named George. He absolutely loved to spend his days exploring deep in the woods and climbing the very tallest trees he could find. Okay, so George wasn't just any boy. Sure, he loved to play, but he also had this little secret. He loved learning everything he possibly could about the world around him. In fact, he was so good with numbers and drawing that he got a real job when he was only 16 years old. That's right, 16. He became something called a surveyor. And a surveyor is kind of like an explorer who hikes out into the wild with all these special tools to measure the land and draw these huge, detailed maps. Can you even imagine having a job like that when you were a teenager? Wow. And let me tell you, this was not an easy job. Nope. He wasn't sitting in some warm, cozy office. His work was a real deal adventure. I'm talking getting totally covered in mud, losing his boots in sticky, gooey swamps, and even sleeping right out under the stars with all these mosquitoes buzzing in his ears. But you know what? He never, ever complained. And that right there is the first amazing thing we learn about George. See, to him, all those tough things weren't really problems. They were just part of the big adventure. He kind of teaches us that even the hardest work can feel like fun, if you just look at it the right way. All right, this next story is probably the most famous one of all about young George. It's a story about a brand new little axe, a beautiful cherry tree, and a really, really important choice. So picture this. George had just gotten a new hatchet as a gift, and he was so excited, just chopping away at little sticks and logs. But he might have gotten a little too carried away, and he accidentally chopped down his father's favorite little cherry tree. When his father found it, he walked right up to George, and he asked him a very serious question. He said, "George, do you know who cut this tree?" Uh-oh. Can you imagine how George must have felt? His heart probably started beating like a little drum. Boom, boom, boom. He could have just told a little fib, right? He could have said, "I don't know who did it," just to stay out of trouble. What do you think you would do? But that's not what George did. He took a great big breath, he looked his father right in the eye, and he showed what real courage looks like. He said, "I cannot tell a lie. I did cut it." And you know the most amazing part? His father wasn't even mad. Not at all. He was proud. He pulled George into a big hug and taught him a lesson that George would remember for his whole entire life. He said, "Your honesty is worth more than 1,000 trees." Being truthful, well, that's more valuable than anything you could ever have. Now, that honesty and that courage, they stayed with George his whole life, especially as he grew up and became a general, a leader of soldiers. He learned that being a good leader isn't about having the fanciest uniform or the warmest house. Nope. It's about being there for people when they need you. Just think about this for a second. During one really, really cold winter, his soldiers were freezing and they were hungry. Now, George was the leader. He could have stayed in a big, warm, comfortable house far, far away, but he didn't. He chose to live in a little log cabin, right there in the freezing snow with all of them, sharing in the hard times. And by doing that, he showed everyone what a true leader really is. See, they don't hide when things get difficult. They stand right there with their people, especially when it's tough. And that's how you earn trust. That's what really matters. Okay, want to hear a little secret? As George Washington got more and more famous, people started telling all sorts of stories about him. Some of them were true, sure, but some were just plain silly. I bet you've heard this one before. It's a super famous story that he had teeth made out of wood, but is that really true? What do you think? Well, the answer is nope, that's just a story. It's a total myth. His dentures were actually made from a mix of all sorts of things like ivory and metal and even animal teeth. Can you believe it? They were probably super uncomfortable, which might be one of the reasons he always looks so serious in his paintings. So, years and years later, after all his adventures and all his hard work, George became the very first president of a new country. And he did such a great job that everybody wanted him to just be their leader forever and ever. A lot of people even wanted him to be a king. A king. Can you imagine? But George said no. He knew it was really important for leaders to step aside and give other people a chance to lead too. So after he was done being president, he happily went right back home to his quiet farm. And that showed a whole different kind of greatness, didn't it? He taught us all that being a great leader isn't just about being in charge. It's also about being wise enough to know when it's time to let someone else have a turn. So when we look back on his whole incredible life, from that curious little boy with a notebook to a brave general and then a president, what do you think he believed was the most important thing of all? It wasn't being famous. It wasn't being powerful. The things that really, truly mattered to him were actually pretty simple. Things like being honest, just like he was with the cherry tree. Working hard, like he did as a young surveyor. Caring for other people, the way he cared for his soldiers out in the cold. And always choosing to do the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing to do. So just remember, George Washington showed us that you don't have to be a president or a general to be great. Greatness is something you build, one small, good, honest choice at a time. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, just think for a little bit. What good choices will you make tomorrow?